Good morning, everyone. In this presentation, we want to analyze the crisis that set off all over the world in 2007-2008 and the consequences that this catastrophe had on the electricity market, in order to understand the causes, the effects, and also to hypothesize some implication that the situation we are running through will have in the nearby future. Starting from the summer of 2007, the entirety of Europe and many other nations worldwide began to face the troubles of a great economic crisis. The accumulation of insolvencies derived from unrepaid subprime mortgages that were liberally granted in the US eventually led to a significant depreciation of a large part of financial activities related to the financial credit. Now, some of you might be wondering what a subprime mortgage is. We thought about leaving the explanation to someone more competent.
Here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath to explain.
Basically, Louis Ranieri's mortgage bonds were amazingly profitable for the big banks. They made billions and billions on their 2% fee they got for selling each of these bonds. But then they started running out of mortgages to put in them. After all, there are only so many homes and so many people with good enough jobs to buy them, right? So the banks started filling these bonds with riskier and riskier mortgages. Thank you, Banjo. That way, they can keep that profit machine churning, right? By the way, these risky mortgages are called subprime. So whenever you hear subprime, think shit. Our friend Michael Burry found out that these mortgage bonds that were supposedly 65% AAA were actually just mostly full of shit. So now he's going to short the bonds, which means to bet against. Got it? Okay. Now fuck off.
Alright, now we are all on the same page. However, at the time, the impact that the matter could have on the global financial industry was unfortunately underestimated. In reality, this event itself was sufficient to trigger the domino effect that caused the collapse of the system of uncontrolled growth that were previously developed. Now let's look at some data of the pre-crisis period. As we can see in the graph, the pre-crisis trend on energy usage was growing worryingly. This was mainly due to the overconsumption of oil, gas and electricity and to the fact that worldwide energy resources were limited. Investments to renew aging energy infrastructures were insufficient and slow. Therefore, energy production couldn't meet the market's request. This led to tense situation in the supply and demand balance with power cuts and even blackouts in some European countries. In addition, the majority of new or planned electricity plants were dependent on fossil fuel, also generating CO2 emissions.
After this description of the global financial crisis, we can now delve into more detail by analyzing the consequences and the effects of the global financial crisis on the energy market. In order to do that, we have decided to separate 2009 from its following years, because as is clear to see, 2009 is the only year in which all three major energy resources recorded a drop in consumption. Before I move on, I would like to highlight how the consequences of the global financial crisis started only with a year of delay and not at the start of the crisis. Now, let's look at the consequences of this crisis. The first and less affected effect is the GDP, losing not more than 4% of the 2007 pre-crisis value. Instead, the most affected one are the CO2 emissions, which dropped almost 10%. But that's a good thing, right? Last but not least is the primary energy consumption, with a 6% dip when confronted with its 2007 value. It is important to notice how the climate and the environment are not negligible factors, since taking them into account results in a smaller primary energy consumption recovery in 2007, as it's clear in the graph, as the orange line is higher than the gray one, and that's due to a particularly cold year in 2010. We can analyze the energy consumption in a more detailed way by considering different consumer sectors. It's quite clear that the big loser is the industry, with an almost 20% drop. The transport sector was very resilient to the crisis, losing only a few percentage points. Instead, the residential, tertiary and agricultural sector had coped quite well with the crisis at the start, as in 2009 the energy consumption of this sector was greater than the starting value of 2007. Notice how the climate is again a non-negligible aspect. Finally, the described data highlighted the energy consumption fall during 2009, which means that the energy demand dropped as well, causing a reduction of the electricity price due to the supply and demand principle. In particular, the electricity prices had dropped by nearly 2/3 since their all-time high around 2008.
As we can see from the figure, between 2008 and 2009, the price of electricity passed from a peak of almost €100 per megawatt hour to almost €30 per megawatt hour in less than 1 year. The drop in electricity prices was almost entirely due to a collapse in demand. In 2009, there was an across-the-board monthly decline of 10% in electricity and gas consumption by the industrial sector, compared to the same period in 2008. The tertiary sector, however, where energy consumption is linked to buildings, and the residential sector, where energy is a vital need, there was more resilience. As we can evaluate in this diagram, which reported the reduction of the production index in the different sectors, the most hit branch was the industry of primary metals. In these industries, there is the highest consumption of energy necessary to refine and work rough materials. The causes of the drop of consumption of electricity are multiple. As the financial crisis became an economic crisis, there was a growth of unemployment all over the world. There was a huge drop of exportation of goods and services towards America. Moreover, investments on new activities were at the lowest levels because of the skepticism over banks, and many industries failed. In mid-October 2008, the Baltic Dry Index, which is a measure of the shipping volume, fell by 50% in 1 week. It happened because the credit crunch made it difficult for exporters to obtain letters of credit. A letter of credit, or credit letter, is a letter from a bank guaranteeing that a buyer's payment to a seller will be received on time and for the correct amount. This index fell more and more with the passing of weeks. The consequences are both less consumption of fuel and less productivity of the industries. The first effect of the lower demand of electricity was the fall of the prices of both coal and natural gas. In fact, we can easily understand that there was a situation of oversupply in those months. During the crisis, gas consumption decreased even more significantly than electricity demand. In fact, it was hit both by direct consumption drops and indirectly by the reduction in request at gas-fired electricity plants. After a significant growth in the early years of the millennium, investments in wind and solar energy plants were hit by low gas prices, lower government incentives, and lack of project finance. Total global annual investment in clean energy dropped by 6% in 2009 compared to 2008. Global green economic stimulus achieved just a little in 2009, due mainly to administrative issues. On the other side, there were less investments also in the realization of new coal or gas extraction plants, because of the situation of oversupply. Anyway, energy from renewable sources and in part from nuclear plants in those years had started to be a considerable quantity of the overall energy produced. It helped lowering the price of energy because of the less expensive costs of maintenance and the absence of externalities for the emissions. Another remarkable cause of the decrease of the price of energy is linked to the externalities represented by the pollution caused by carbon dioxide. In particular, in that period, there was a relevant drop of the cost of CO2 produced, which contributed to low beyond the electricity price.
Finally, we present the last period of the financial crisis. In this graph is presented the monthly wholesale electricity price, range of maximum and minimum prices. At 2008, the price of energy was tremendously high in comparison with the tendency of the following years. From that year, we can see an unbelievable fall of the price due to the crisis, even if from 2008 the 2010 the price was slowly increasing and maintained the same trend. Now I show you the primary energy production from 19th century and 2017. As we can see from the graph, from 2008 there is an overall decreases of the tendency in consumption of almost all the type of energy, except from the renewables and biofuels that in 2008 firms start to focus on. What we can see is that during the crisis age, 2008 and 2010, the renewable production increased a lot because of the decreasing of the price of the fossil fuel. The natural gas has lost ground for different reasons, including the rapid adoption of the renewable sources. Also, the increase of the price of the gas and the low cost of the emission have influenced the situation as well. Now in this slide I present the price of oil from 2008 to 2018. And as I already told you, the price of oil decreased during 2008 and 2009. This is the main reason why we find on the last graph an horizontal trend of the production of renewable energy. After this year, the price of oil started to increase. In the last part of our presentation, we analyze the actual situation in the energy market. So the main question is the current situation affected by the coronavirus? The measure to fight coronavirus are already giving their first effect on the economy and the energy sector. Every country in Europe has seen electricity demand fall in 2-7% week on week. These are very significant falls in the context of electricity demand, where temperature-adjusted change are normally small. In Italy, Spain, and probably France, show you twice the impact of any other country. To conclude, we want to show you the electricity demand of the last month of Italy. In Italy, although the week-on-week falls was 12%, there was already 8% impact from the previous week, implying a total impact of 20%. The graph shows the Italy impact start earlier. In addition, in Italy imposed further the lockdown, meaning even more industry and service will shut down, and the impact of electricity demand could even exceed in 20%. So thank you very much to everyone for their attention, and we hope you enjoy our presentation.